Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the May 6, 2014 business meeting of the Washington County Board of Education. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have a quorum of members present. To begin the meeting, I'd like to introduce Elisa Shaw. She's a 5th grade student at Williamsport Elementary. She is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Elisa?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Elisa, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who did you bring with you today?
Today I brought my mother, Maria Shaw, and my principal, Miss Palmer.
And what's your favorite subject in school?
My favorite subject in school is probably reading.
Reading. Good for you. And what do you like to do when you're not in school?
Whenever I'm not in school, I do a theater company called Walker Performing Arts, Hagerstown Children's Theater. I'm sure you've heard of it.
If we haven't yet, we will soon, right? Because you're going to be a star in it. What else do you like to do?
I love to do swimming. Whenever I was little, I was on a swim team. I was like 5 years old, and it was just for little kids over in Rockville.
That's great. The way you handle that microphone, I can tell you're going to be a star.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming and starting our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you to Mrs. Palmer, and thank you, Mom. We appreciate it, and we'll let you head back to class.
Thank you very much.
All right. Are there any students or guests that any board members would like to introduce? Okay, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Or, I'm sorry, the agenda is what I meant to say. The approval of the agenda.
Mr. President, I'd like to move for approval of the agenda as presented by the Agenda Committee.
I'll second.
Motion by Mrs. Brightman, second by Mrs. Fisher. Are there any corrections or amendments to the agenda? If not, all those in favor of approval? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. Next is the approval of the minutes.
Mr. President, I will be moving to adopt the minutes from a closed session held Tuesday, April the 15th, 2014, and also minutes from the business meeting held on the same date. I'd like to move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bailey and second by Mrs. Brightman. Are there any corrections, amendments, or changes to the minutes? If not, all those in favor of approval? All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Student member concurs with one abstention. That brings us to public comment. We have one individual signed up to speak, Mr. Perini.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hartings, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. My name is Peter Perini, and I'm a candidate for the Washington County Board of Education. Thank you once again for the opportunity to speak with you. I know you have much to do today, so I will be very brief. First, let me say that I learned a great deal by attending the joint meeting of the County Commissioners and Board of Education this morning. I am pleased that under the expert direction of Dr. Wilcox, the Washington County Public Schools has continued to work hard to identify the pupil generation rates for Washington County, an important statistic that is needed by the County Commissioners in establishing the AFPO rates, which will affect economic development in our county. I wanted to speak to you today about the development of new high schools in Washington County, specifically about developing small specialty high schools. With the success of the Barbara Ingram School for the Arts, it seems appropriate to explore other options of small specialty schools for high school students. These specialty high schools can create an opportunity for program-specific focused learning in an atmosphere based on that area of study. By developing smaller specialty high schools, the Board of Education may be able to delay the expense of building a new full-sized high school, which can cost $80 million or more. This would be a result of freeing up seats in the existing schools, while some high school students elect to study in one of the new types of schools. Specialty high schools would be a better investment of our county's taxpayers' dollars. Additionally, creating locations of choice for our high school students lessens the need for redistricting or redrawing the boundaries of current high schools in Washington County, thus allowing those students who associate themselves with a particular high school to stay in that school. So I encourage you all to consider the concept of specialized high schools for students in the Washington County Public Schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perini. Is there any brief response from any board members? If not, thank you. That brings us to the superintendent's report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hardings. We will begin today by inviting the Washington County Technical High School students who have recently completed at Maryland Skills USA State Championships. I believe the competition was April 4th and 5th. Is that correct for most of you? We're going to ask them to come forward. We'd like the board members to come forward to congratulate these young people, and then we'll have some comments from some of our champions. So board members, would you come forward?
Thank you, Dr. Wilcox and members of the board. As we did at one of our recent board meetings where we honored some of our student athletes, today we're honoring some of our excellent academic and trades students in the school system. Tech High students, if you'll stand up and come up as your name is called. Austin Dietrich, gold medal, Skills USA. Peter Crampton, gold medalist, Skills USA. Valerie Taylor, gold medalist. Brennan Taylor, gold medalist. Jenna Simane, gold medalist. Casey Schindel, gold medalist. Alan Clark III, gold medalist. Ellie Scrivener, gold medalist. Lacey Smith, silver medalist. Jermisha Greens, silver medalist. Alexis Longfellow, silver medalist. Darren Bittinger, silver medalist. Megan Berry, silver medalist. Jason McElwain, silver medalist. David Lewis, bronze medalist. Kelsey Cooper, bronze medalist. And Mrs. Kelman thinks she's getting away with this, but Marjorie Kelman, teacher. Sorry, advisor, she says. Can we give everyone a round of applause, please? Now, we have one student from Tech High, and I think a partner or two who are going to come forward and talk to the board members briefly about the experience at the Skills USA.
Board members, have you joined us back here? Jamie, would you look at the Ustream video? Mindy Marston is now speaking on Ustream. Would you look? Thank you. Thank you. So, young people, I know that you're going to speak. I want to share with you what a wise board member said yesterday. There are lots of people who know things, but that's the extent of it. They're knowledgeable. But then there are students like you who not only have great knowledge, but you have the skills to do things. So would you talk to us a little bit about what you do each and every day at school?
Every day at school?
Well, why don't you talk about your prepared remarks, because I think that will tell us.
All right. The motto of Skills USA is preparing for leadership in the world of work. The three main goals of Skills USA is leadership training, which the officers had the opportunity to go to Ocean City this fall for 2 days of intensive leadership training. Another main goal is community service. We've done community service projects such as wrapping presents at the mall for the Red Cross and Cinderella's Closet, which raises money for the Humane Society. And the third main goal is competitions. And it builds sportsmanship and good relations between all the students in the organization.
So how about each of you who are here today, can you tell us a little bit about your area and what your competition felt like or looked like?
I study digital communications at Tech High, so I do photography and like film production. My competition was the photography competition, and we had a lot to do. We had like a field assignment we had to do. We had to do a studio assignment, an editing assignment. There was just a lot we had to do. I didn't expect to win at all. I was so excited.
Well, congratulations on your win.
I'm in the computer repair and networking program at the Technical High School, and I'm actually very excited that I'll be attending the national competition again, as I was one of the only students still present at Tech High to have attended it twice consecutively in Kansas City. Last year, we took the silver medal for our Career Pathways Showcase, Specialization in Information Technology, and our project was based around cybersecurity, which obviously is a new initiative that most of Partial and the government is looking at. And we really wanted to focus on how it applies to communities, because that's part of how Skills USA operates, the community value and how it applies to business and industry. And this year we're returning again with the hopes to succeed that second place finish and actually maintain a first place finish for the county. So.
Thank you very much.
I study early childhood education, and I competed in the area of prepared speech. So I basically spoke about the Skills USA motto, which is Skills USA Champions at Work, and I incorporated my personal experience in the early childhood education department into what it means to be a champion, in my opinion. And yeah, that's what I did.
Well, thank you. And I know you talked about the competition, but how about your...
My tech area is pre-engineering and architecture, and for our competition, me and my partner David did robotics, and we built a robot out of Vex parts and programmed it to move balls on a playing field, and we also did a presentation on how we built it.
Outstanding. Was your robot a tethered robot, or was it a free robot?
It was a free roaming robot.
Outstanding, outstanding. Board members, do you have any questions for these fine students?
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment that the poise and self-assurance that these young folks have sitting before a board is very impressive. The way you express yourselves, I couldn't imagine myself being able to do that junior or senior in high school. You're to be commended for your abilities.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Yes, Mr.
I just wanted to tell you that I was at Tech when it was first born into a full-fledged high school. I taught English out there for about 12 years, and it was absolutely spectacular. And I was always in awe of the students who came through because they had made a decision so early and were capable of carrying it through and securing either a college degree afterwards or a very prestigious job. And I envy your choices, and I think you're doing an excellent job. It's one of my favorite schools. And I will be there at graduation to speak.
Well, students, I want to thank you very much, not only for the poise and dignity that you carry yourselves with, but for the model that you provide for not just the younger underclassmen at the school who have not yet had the privilege of competing, but also for students across this county who are understanding now that there is dignity in work, that there's dignity in skill, and that there's great opportunity. I imagine most of you have opportunities now beyond high school that wouldn't have been available to you had you not been at the technical high school, so thank you. That kind of experience doesn't happen without great leadership. I want to recognize the principal, Jeff Stauffer, who is in the room. Jeff, thank you very, very much for what you do. Ms. Kellerman, thank you so much for what you do as an advisor to these young people. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That's all, you can leave now. Mr. President, my next item in the superintendent's report is to ask the representatives of the Safe Place organization to come forward. Safe Place of Washington County would like to thank students from the Technical High School in particular for their work during the Child Abuse and Prevention Month. Tech High teacher John Jones and his video, as well as his photography students, are also here today. And Mooch, if you'd come forward, please, and if you'd bring the president of Safe Place, or at least of the board of directors, perhaps. Andrea, you're more than welcome to be in. Please sit down. Andrea Henson is on the board of directors. That's all right.
I'm going to let Andrea talk first, so I don't bogart the whole conversation. So,
We
go
only
ahead,
have
Andrea.
5 minutes, so divide it up how you'd like.
Oh, I thought we had 10. Oh, all right.
I think I just heard someone use the word execution as far as these high school students, and we worked with the visual communications students, and they helped us from start to finish produce a billboard that was in 2 locations. We have pictures, but from start to finish, they took pictures of the children and produced and edited these 2 amazing billboards. And we're just very honored to work with the local high school to help a local organization for Child Abuse Prevention Month. Oh, that's fine. And currently, right now, the students are working on building a set in-house and producing our December billboards, as well as our PSA, our public service announcement for child abuse in November, December. So this is one of our billboards. I don't know. Kelsey, do you want to speak to this? And she was the one that took the pictures. And
Kelsey, if you do, you have to come up front so the TV can pick up your voice.
Come on, Kelsey.
Come on, Kelsey. Be bold.
we're just really honored and proud of the students for all the hard work that they did for us. We were kind of in a time crunch, and they worked well to that along the leadership of Mr. Jones. So Kelsey, you want to speak to the billboards because you were the one that photographed the children?
Well, it was a lot of fun, and I had a great time doing the experience. And I really like the fact that it was for a good cause, is that I got to do it. So,
And this also helped Kelsey with her portfolio for going to college. So it was part of her, part of that.
yeah,
But it
Shepherd actually really liked it, and they thought it was really professional already. So,
it was great. So Mitch, do you want to speak?
Certainly I do. The biggest thing about running a child advocacy center here in Washington County, of course, is we're here to protect the kids and to get young what did you call young, not young adults? Maybe you did you say young adults, sir?
I think so.
Young adults involved in any type of project that we have is a plus for us, because the sooner that you can start telling kids about the horrors of child abuse, the better off you are. So to get them involved, and Mr. Jones told me they were fighting over this project. So I'm glad he didn't have to call the resource officer, but I was happy to hear that that they really wanted to get involved in this project. And we have a couple more projects that we're doing with them, so we should probably, we'll be back next year, I hope, and talk a little bit about it too. I also have a letter that I'd like to read. All right?
Please.
Okay. And Mr. Principal Stauffer's in the room, so this goes out to him too. But to dear Mr. Jones, on behalf of the staff of Safe Place, the Friends of Safe Place Board, and all the many children we serve at Safe Place, I wanted to say thank you to you and your gang of artistes for all you did in creating the billboards for us to use during Child Abuse Prevention Month in April. Without your gang's time, talent, and energy, we would not have been able to get these billboards in place to promote our cause. Many people told us how impressed they were with them and how important the message is for our community. Last year, Safe Place Washington County's Child Advocacy Center served 372 primary victims of abuse, and outstanding 49%, or 181 children, received services for sexual abuse. Each child who comes to Safe Place finds a child-centered facility and caring professional staff to help him or her find a brighter tomorrow. Community support is not only instrumental in helping us carry on our program, but also strengthens our resolve to continue in our efforts to collaboratively confront the issues of child abuse in Washington County. Again, I'd like to thank Principal Stauffer and Mr. Jones, and please tell all your students just how much we appreciate their support for our mission, providing services to our smallest victims of abuse, the children of Washington County. Warmest regards, myself, Director of Safe Place Child Advocacy Center, and the Friends Board of Safe Place.
Thank you, Mooch. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, students. It's probably fitting that our next award is a recognition of the great teachers that have the privilege of serving young people like yourselves in Washington County. I'd like the board members to join me up front, and I'd like Ms. Fry, representing the teachers, to join us up front as I read this proclamation. So if you'll go up front. I'll join you in one moment. I think the significance of having our board members stand up front and Ms. Fry join them up front is because this is a partnership. It's a partnership between a Board of Education that is very much interested in the best service of children and the Teachers Association, which is very much interested in not only representing the teachers but of serving children as well. The Washington County Board of Education offers this proclamation. Whereas teachers make public schools great, and whereas teachers work to open the minds of young students to ideas, knowledge, and dreams, and whereas teachers keep American democracy alive by laying the foundation for good citizenship, and whereas teachers fill many roles as listeners, explorers, role models, motivators, mentors, and whereas teachers continue to influence us long after our school days are only memories, therefore be it proclaimed that May 6, 2014 is observed by the Washington County Public Schools as National Teacher Day in recognition of the impact teachers have had on all of our lives. Presented this 6th day of May 2014, and it's signed by the superintendent and all of the elected board members. Please join me in thanking the teachers of Washington County. Board members, if you want to return your seats, Ms. Fry may have a comment that she might want to make.
I told Dr. Hardings, as he was presenting the proclamation to me, that he had read my mind, that watching the product of these great children behind us is the ultimate pleasure of being a teacher, of watching where their minds and talents could go. And I've been out of the classroom long enough that I miss this. And I recognize on a daily basis that I miss working with the kids. And on behalf of the 1,700 teachers in our system, I thank you for this recognition today.
Thank you, Denise. We appreciate it. Ms. Fry, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for those of you watching on television, our students have a bus to catch. That was at no means meant anything other than that. Mr. President, I'll return the agenda to you.
All right, that brings us to the first item under old business. Actually, I should catch myself. After Mr. Perini spoke, I failed to ask the audience if anybody else wanted the opportunity to speak who didn't sign up. Is there anybody else who's here who'd like to speak, public comment? Okay, great. That brings us to old business, the first item, which is the consideration of the second reading of revised policy JG, student discipline.
Good afternoon. Local boards of education across the state of Maryland are required to adopt new regulations regarding student discipline as a result of the action taken by the State Board of Education. On April 1st, the first reading of the proposed new policy JK entitled Student Discipline was presented to the Board of Education during its public business meeting. During that first reading, several recommended changes to the policy were referred to the policy committee. Since the first reading, there has been a great deal of activity, the first being that the proposed changes were placed on board docs and members of the community were invited to offer comments. On April the 9th, the policy committee conducted a public work session, and at that time, they considered the recommended changes that were offered during the first reading, and they adopted 5 of the 6 recommended changes. At the conclusion of the policy committee meeting, an additional notice was placed on board docs to inform the public of the new changes recommended by the policy committee. A period of 30 days was provided for public comment on these proposed regulations and, policy, but we did not receive any comments. Assuming that the board takes action this afternoon to adopt the proposed new policy, there will be some follow-up activities that will be required. The first will be to disseminate this new policy to school administrators and teachers in the school community to make them aware of the new policy. The second will be that staff, in consultation with the superintendent, must work on and prepare a new administrative regulation that sets forth the various procedures that must be followed. And finally, prior to the commencement of the school year, it will be necessary to provide school staff with professional development on the new requirements. As many of you are aware, this was a very intense effort, a great deal of hard work on a number of individuals. I'd like to acknowledge the guidance and the commitment of the board members who served on the policy committee, Dr. Wilcox, Dr. Marco, Mr. Akers, Ms. Costello, and Jamie Brown for their hard work and diligence with regard to the preparation of this policy for the board's consideration. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I move for the approval of the rescission of current policy JG entitled Student Discipline to become effective July 1st, 2014.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion by Mrs. Fisher, second by Mrs. Brightman. Discussion? Okay, so this motion is the rescission of the existing policy effective July 1st.
Yes.
And then there will be a follow-on motion for, just so everybody's clear on what the process is. Okay, so if there's no discussion, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. Is there another motion?
Yes, Mr. President, I move for the approval of the second reading and adoption of proposed policy JK entitled Student Discipline to become effective July 1st, 2014.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Fisher, second by Mrs. Brightman. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Brightman?
Just a couple follow-up questions. I appreciate the consideration by the policy committee and some of the changes made at their last meeting. During the entire process, Mr. Trotta, or maybe board members can help me understand, did everyone go over and review the entire policy manual as to other policies that may indeed be impacted by this? I know several counties have talked about having to change 30 or 40 different policies in their manuals that were impacted by these changes. So I was wondering if we're able to consolidate all of that.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow. Dr. Marco is a part of that meeting, as is Mr. Akers and Ms. Costello. And we've identified numerous policies and administrative regulations that we're going to have to examine to determine whether they will have to be changed or updated in any way. And as the board and superintendent may recall, we adopted a new policy on policy. So not only will we have to pick up any changes as a result of the approval this afternoon, but we're also going to have to place it in the new format. So I do anticipate us bringing forward to you other proposed policy changes. We will be issuing additional administrative regulations so that they're in line with the action taken by the board this afternoon.
And with everyone's knowledge that there's been a delay in the code of conduct and the model that the state MSDE will be coming down to us, and at this point that may be June, July. I guess my question is implementation of all of this. The one is how do we align any changes that might occur June and July? How do we get the handbook out to students? Is there any chance that MSDE may extend the deadline or requirement to have this in place by the next school year? I know I put a lot of things together, but...
Yeah, unfortunately, we do not have the luxury of waiting for the state to take final action on the code of conduct for students. So it will be necessary for us to move forward to make sure that we have the necessary information in place by July the 1st, because that's our deadline for submission with regard to our student handbook. We will closely monitor what the state is doing. It may be that they might not act until August or September. So we can't wait for them to finalize their decision-making. We must move forward, and then we're going to have to once again reconcile what action we have taken with what action the state may take in the future. The other is, as you may recall, the board president on behalf of the board submitted a letter to the state board recommending to them that they really hold everything in abeyance and really look at this in a comprehensive manner so that we would not have this piecemeal approach to the issuance of policies and regulations and things of that nature. Unfortunately, they did not heed that advice, although recently we did share with you a communication from the State Board of Education that they are now looking at a number of other policies that are going to have an impact on disciplinary matters. And they now, it seems now they refer to it as a framework, is what they've developed going forward. So we're hopeful that going forward they will provide us with a comprehensive response as opposed to periodic information and requests as to how we should align our policies and regulations with the state requirements.
I appreciate that explanation. I just think it's important for the public to understand that this is going to be sort of a moving target as we try to be sure that the information is put out there in a timely manner. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Mr. President,
Bailey?
I'm just curious as to whether the committee had discussion on compulsory attendance laws that are now in effect or will be in effect, and how that would relate to this policy, such as, you know, a 17-year-old, your compulsory attendance law is for, you know, you must stay in school till you're 17. And I think we're going to
Goes
move
up
that to
at
18.
18.
You're going to move
It's
that to
gonna be
18.
phased in.
That's correct.
Has that entered into the thinking of this policy or not?
Not really. I think it was just an acknowledgement that that is the law. Currently, it's the age 17, and then the following year, it's going to go to age 18, it's compulsory.
Right.
So we didn't really, I think, give any particular attention to that particular law as it relates to this, but we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow, as a matter of fact, of the policy committee, and certainly we can add that as an agenda item if they're so inclined to do so.
I just raised the question because I think it's going to require some creativity and some thinking on the part of school administrators in dealing with the compulsory attendance law when it becomes 18.
Is there any other discussion? If not, the question's on Mrs. Fisher's motion to approve the second read of policy JK. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we move to new business. The first item under new business is consideration of a gift to Pangbourne Elementary School. Mr. Semler.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board. I'm here today to seek your approval for the gift of the amount of $6,000 given to Pangbourne Elementary School from the Pangbourne Elementary PTO. The funds will be used to support STEM instruction in all grade levels. Each grade will receive $1,000 to purchase STEM-related materials and resources.
Thank you, Mr. Semler.
Sure.
Is there a motion?
So moved, Mr. President.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ridenhour, seconded by Mr. Bailey to accept the gift. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Bright?
Mr. Semler, give me some example of what that $1,000, the STEM items that the classes might be purchasing.
Well, the description didn't go too far into detail, but I would assume that it would look at how STEM instruction could be infused with the different content areas, providing some additional literature, some different resources the kids could use for using science experiments, or even going into with enhancing some of their technology in their classroom, and just creating more of the STEM atmosphere with the everyday instruction that they're doing.
Generally, they have the devices they need, so this is an addition.
Enhancing, yes.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? If not, all those in favor of accepting the gift? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Semler. We move now to the second item under new business, which is the first read of proposed policy GBEE, social media.
Thank you. The Board of Education's Human Resources Committee and its Policy Committee in coordination with the Human Resources Department, are recommending the adoption of a new policy which is entitled Employee Use of Social Media. The purpose of this policy is to establish a framework for the use of social media by school system employees. The policy recognizes that in an effort to promote teaching, learning, and interaction with the community, that school employees use social media to communicate with students, parents, and the school community. The policy provides employees with guidance with regard to the use of social media. Policy makes it very clear that when an employee engages in such communications, the employee must comply with the highest standards of honesty, integrity, professionalism, and the employee must adhere to the laws that govern confidentiality and student privacy. This policy authorizes the superintendent of schools to promulgate administrative regulations and guidelines. And we welcome any questions that you may have regarding this new proposed policy.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve the first reading of proposed policy GBEE entitled Employee Use of Social Media.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Williams, second by Mrs. Brightman for approval of the policy. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Fisher?
While I appreciate the need for guidance and control over how employees use social media, I wish this policy did not allow for communication with students to become part of this policy's goal, because it allows, and I'm now going to quote, any internet/web-based platform that allows interactive communication between individual persons, groups, entities, or organizations, unquote. To me, this opens up the chance of inappropriate contacts with young people, some of whom their parents may not have computers at home or may not want them to be using computers or specifically social media. And thus it also opens up the school system to possible lawsuits if children are harmed in any way. So I will have to vote against this policy, even though I do, as I say, appreciate the need for some guidance and control over employee use.
Mrs. Brightman?
Sort of a general question to everyone up here. Could you help us understand what security and safeguards there are in place already, excuse me, that might address some of Mrs. Fisher's concerns? I don't know if you need an IT person.
I will need an IT person, but I will also just introduce that, and I think I saw Arnold back there. I know that our sites that are sanctioned by the system, there are many sites that are blocked. So a student or an employee on a WCPS network cannot just type in any website and expect a result. There are blocks.
Our filtering system is countywide through all the schools, regardless of what type of device you use. It all goes through the same filter, and we restrict the sites that they go to. But we do not have a way of restricting what is communicated through a site that is approved.
So content control, and that would be more based on the teacher?
Yes.
Correct.
Anyone wish to expand on this? I know that this is a concern possibly in the community, and I just thought it would be an opportunity to allow everyone to know that we are sensitive to this concern.
Well, I'll expand on it in the sense that we already have employees using social media with students in their classrooms and to communicate with parents and students. And so this policy gives us a way to provide some parameters for that. So it's already happening. This gives us a way to put some guidelines around it.
Thank you.
Are there other comments? Mr. Grunendijk?
Yeah, kind of going along with Mrs. Brightman's question, what kind of framework is there currently in place? Because I know there is some ambiguity when my teachers have tried to use social media and they're not really sure what exactly they can do with it. What kind of framework is there currently in place for that? or do we not have one and this is why?
This is establishing the framework.
Mhm.
We know teachers are using social media. I don't think there's a set of guidelines beyond the student handbook at this point, and that's why we are creating this policy specifically that relates to employees.
Okay.
Also, in the framework for teaching, which is our evaluation observation tool, there's professionalism in domain 4, which speaks specifically to interactions with stakeholders, communication with stakeholders, and overall professionalism. So that does provide a guideline for something such as social media.
But other than that, we don't have a specific set of guidelines for the use of social media.
Not outside of this policy, no.
Okay.
One of the things that I'd share that we attempt to do, we attempt to drive that teacher-student communication to websites or social media that we control. For example, within the district, we have My Big Campus that we use. We've tried some other different applications. But what we're finding is, in spite of those best efforts, people still use kind of the contemporary media. A lot of the veterans of technology will use Facebook. A lot of the younger folks might use Twitter, Instagram, or some other communications tools. And we really want to get a handle on this. We know we can't regulate it, but we need to have some parameters that help govern our behaviors as we try to monitor what's in the best interest of young people. So that's really all this policy does. It gives us the ability to start to begin to craft some regulations that we can apply administratively.
Are there other comments? I want to acknowledge, too, Mrs. Fisher's concern. We had a lengthy discussion about a number of these issues in the policy committee, and I think it's an issue that all employers really are struggling with. I mean, in the public school setting, well, they're struggling with because I think in many cases the lines between your personal digital footprint, if you will, where you exist in your personal life in the digital world, heavily intersects with your existence in the digital world in your professional life. And I think all employers are trying to figure out where those lines go. In the school setting, and people might disagree at any point along a continuum, but one could imagine a teacher having some sort of a Facebook page that's, my Mrs. Smith's calculus class. Okay, and that's all it's focused on is answering questions. Well, most of us would probably think, well, that makes sense. If that's the way her kids are communicating, a good tool for the teacher to help use to communicate with their kids. What if the teacher then does that, or an administrator does that with their own personal page? Okay, well, what if they're friends now with parents of their students? Well, that's probably okay. What if they start posting things on their own page that, says what an awful, terrible guy the superintendent is? Okay, things start to get more difficult, all right?
I disagree with that.
That one's definitely out. Other one. So you can think about a continuum of behaviors that, on the one side, yeah, we definitely want that to happen. On the other side, we don't want to intrude on people's First Amendment rights or their rights to do what they want to do in their own personal time. But to the point that starts to intersect with the job or to reflect on the public school system, I think there is an interest in the public schools in setting some sort of boundaries around those. And I'm not saying I have the answer. Actually, it's through the regulations that you're going to have to come up with the answers, to be honest. But I think it is an important question that we're wrestling with, that I think all employers are wrestling with.
To amplify your point, or maybe provide a further example, let's say that a teacher uses their personal Facebook account to communicate with students on an assignment. The question could be raised, as a student interacts with the teacher, have we violated the student's FERPA rights in some way by exposing them to the friends of the teachers if the page isn't private? So there are just a number of things that we have to do. Have we introduced somebody, because a young person might reasonably expect that if a teacher has friends on her Facebook page, they're all really good people. And therefore, the student could then friend some of those good people too. And then the conversation could go on independent of the classroom teacher and outside of the realm of what any of us contemplated. So we have to spend some time talking about this and learning from some of the best districts in the country, as well as some of our own experience, and put together some regulations that help to provide kind of a rough framework for where we can go. We think that this makes more sense than simply cordoning off this district and saying, you know what, cyberspace doesn't exist outside of this district. We know our kids are out there, we know our teachers are out there, so how do we add some sanity to that conversation? And that's really why we're asking you to pass this first read of the policy, so we can begin to put those regulations together.
Any other discussion? If not, the question is on Mrs. Williams' motion to approve the first read of policy GBEE. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion passes 6-1, and the student member concurs. Thank you all. That brings us to item 3 under new business, which is the consent agenda.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. 7 procurement items on the consent agenda for your consideration this afternoon. The first is an RFP that was issued by Washington County Public Schools for tires and services for the Transportation Department. Proposals were received in order to select a distributor, dealer, and manufacturer of tires for as-needed purchase and delivery of tires and related services to our Transportation Department. A key objective of the RFP was to obtain local service and the lowest available prices for quality tires and related services. Net prices for tires include profit, overhead, insurance, handling, and providing and delivering the tires to the school system. The Procurement Review Committee discussed this bid format and the bid result, and is recommending that the Board of Education approve the recommendation for utilizing the Goodyear Countrywide School Bus Purchase Program and the Michelin Truck Tires Purchase Program, as well as the unit rates for services that are provided in the board report that you have in front of you, I hope. 6 other items on the agenda include a purchase order for utilizing a Carroll County Public Network contract for the purchase of network switches for E. Russell Hicks Middle School. The purchase will increase bandwidth and improve access and performance for students doing online testing at that location. Also on the agenda is, I think I jumped to item 3. Item 2 is the quote for upgrading the current VMware license on servers located at Marshall Street, North Hagerstown High School campus, and at South Hagerstown High campus. That software allows for the operation of the network servers that are dedicated for use of the security camera systems at those locations. And the software purchase will allow for the virtualization of the operation of the servers, allowing us to maximize capacity of the hardware that is used for those security camera systems. The Instructional Technology Department obtained quotes, and we're recommending that we move forward with the purchase to Tiger Direct. I already went over item 3, the network switches for E. Russell Hicks. Items 4 and 5 under consent agenda both utilize this Cooperative Purchasing Network Contract R5045. This contract provides pricing and services for HVAC equipment, refrigeration, installation service, and related products. It's not a bid that Washington County Public Schools let, but it is a cooperative opportunity for securing a reliable and responsible contractor to help us maintain our mechanical systems and equipment throughout the school system. We're recommending the adoption of 2 orders, one for annual service for mechanical equipment at 24 schools, the other for providing water treatment services at 10 schools and the Center for Education Services. We also have 2 vehicles that we're requesting your approval to purchase today. One is a cargo van from the American Truck and Bus Company. We're replacing a gasoline van that's not working very well at the moment for a diesel van. And the last item on the agenda is for the purchase of a cab and chassis. The Maintenance and Operations Department has intended to convert an existing vehicle to use as a salt spreader. So we'll be taking the flat back of the truck and putting it on this new vehicle to provide the maintenance department with a general purpose large truck to utilize for their activities in the operations department. I'm here if you have any questions about any of these procurement items this afternoon, and lots of folks, I think, are in the room who can help as well.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I'm going to detail the motion to include all of the elements and components that were just recommended to the board for the purpose of having placed in the record.
Excellent.
I move to approve the bid for tires and services for the Transportation Department to Rice Tire at bid prices. Quotation 304-8576 for software for security systems servers to Tiger Direct at $51,119.68. Quotation 0000834 for network switches for E. Russell Hicks Middle School to Skyline Technology Solutions at $57,820.30. Requisition number 169734 for annual maintenance services to mechanical equipment to Bowen Train at $60,560. Requisition 169733 for water treatment services at 10 schools and the CES at $39,060. Proposal dated April 21st, 2014 for a cargo van to American Truck and Bus Incorporated at $41,997.82, and to utilize Montgomery County contract number 1022192 for a cab and chassis from Criswell Chevrolet at an estimated price of $45,081. Recommend approval.
Is there a second?
Second, Mr. President.
Motion by Mr. Bailey, second by Mr. Ridenour. Is there any discussion? If not, the question is on approval. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Student member concurs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. That was a quick one. No questions. That's great. Fourth item under new business is the Food and Nutrition Services budget for FY 2015. Mr. Poole.
Dr. Michaels and Jeff, I'm sorry. Would you spend some time on during this proposal talking a little bit about how this building has the cafeteria services it does and the staff and the primary responsibilities that they were hired to deliver? Mr. Michaels, I know you're aware of that.
Sure.
Thank you. And thank you, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hardings, members of the board, Dr. Wilcox. Today we're here to present the FY15 operating budget for the Food Nutrition Service Program. As the board's aware, this is an enterprise fund. It's not part of the general operating budget of the Board of Education. It's a separate budget that requires approval of the Board of Education, again, as an enterprise fund. What Dr. Wilcox just started to describe is one segment of our enterprise fund located here at the Center for Educational Services. And that portion houses a great deal of our senior citizen meals, as well as helps us support and operate the cafeteria. But all of that's supported by income that comes from various sources, including sold meals and things like that. Today, we're presenting our general operating budget to include all expenses estimated based on current meal rates and use, as well as income expenses, anticipated income, and a request for a slight increase in meal costs for student meals. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Pruitt.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. I think, wages to begin, the presentation in terms of how we arrive at the numbers we do, and a lot of it drives off of student enrollments, existing meal participation patterns, as well as our farm rates. So with that, I'll kind of walk you through.
Looks like we're on enrollment trends, a little ahead of ourselves.
One feeds the other, no pun
That's
intended.
true. While Mr. Prue's finding that information, our average daily breakfast and lunch participation, much like Dr. Wilcox just indicated, as our enrollment has increased, the number of meals and breakfasts that we have sold or served based on our free and reduced meal effort as well have increased. Mr. Prue?
Okay, so to start you off with the trends, first you have your breakfast trend, and what you'll notice has been predominantly a steady increase over the last 9-10 years. What we're proposing for the coming year is sort of a flat basis on breakfast. A lot of this hinges on changes we may make to the breakfast program, specifically the inclusion of different school sites in the Maryland Meals for Achievement program, which is a universal free breakfast program served in the classroom. The significant jump during this current fiscal year is that we added 3 new sites at the start of the school year. That application yet is pending with the Department of Education. They've not asked for new sites for next year at this point. So we didn't want to count on that increase because really it comes down to what funds they have available and whether we can increase. What you see on the lunch participation is sort of a flat and actually a slight dip on the lunch side. Really this, I believe, goes hand in hand with some of what we've had to do in terms of changes within the meal pattern and really driving student acceptability. What we're looking to do in the coming year, and why we've sort of flattened that trend off, is we have large-scale changes to the menu, which we're hashing around in our office right now to hold off on really what we're seeing on that declining student trend to school meals, and that's where we're tackling that program. In terms of a comparison of where lunch prices are around the state right now, you'll notice that we are dead even with our colleagues to the east, but ahead on price to our colleagues to the west, and significantly ahead of the state average in the elementary and in secondary lunch categories. In terms of our expected revenues, you've got a breakout here by the large target segments. It's worth noting that 61% of our revenue in the enterprise fund is from federal dollars. These are the reimbursements we receive for the service of meals to all of our students in all of the eligibility categories, both full pay, including full pay, free and reduced. On the expenditure side, really 3 categories drive the bus. It's labor, it's the benefits that go along with the cost of our labor, and it is the food cost. That is 92% of all anticipated expenditures within the food service fund. The slide you have here is a proposal or recommendation for you to consider, which is a 10-cent increase in the paid meal prices for our paid students for breakfast and for lunch at all grade levels, as well as a corresponding 10-cent increase in lunches to our paid staff. This increase is recommended to you as a result of what we anticipate on our expenses to balance our operations. But as you recall, there is a paid lunch equity statute at the federal level, and this increase does meet that requirement as well. Lastly, what you have in front of you is a balanced budget at slightly more than $11 million in terms of projected income and projected expenses. To the point of Dr. Wilcox's question previously, to expand briefly on what Dr. Michael said, the operations here at the Center for Education Services is just a small portion of what we do in terms of the entire department and entire system. We have contract meals that run out of this facility, as well as the daily cafeteria that operates for staff. This facility operates as a separate cost center, as a small portion of the entire enterprise fund, so all the expenditures and revenues for this fund are separated out and segregated out, so we can track them separately from what happens with our school meal operations. And in terms of the staff, from an administrative perspective, my team all has various levels of experience and operational oversight for the entire system. There's not a single individual that has specific tasks that is just here. The gentleman that does oversee operations here in the central office cafeteria also writes all of our menus. That's our chef, Jody Francisco, the manager of culinary development, who, as you may recall, you approved the hire of this past fall. Jody's driving the menu right now for all of our schools and driving our changes in terms of what we're doing at our schools. What new menu items we may offer, how is that product procured, and as well looking at our farm to school program so we can drive local economy and keep our federal dollars here to support the local economy. So that's just one piece of the puzzle, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, of course, on the entire program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. Dr. Michael, is there a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve the FY 2015 Food and Nutrition Services budget.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion by Mrs. Brightman, seconded by Mrs. Fisher. Any discussion? Mrs. Brightman?
Mr. Prue, if you could maybe expand a little bit on the federal community eligibility pilot. I know Washington County took the lead on that, and see if you can help us understand the outcomes, that it is a cost-saving mechanism.
Sure. So the community eligibility provision was a pilot over the last 3 years run by USDA, authorized under the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010. This is the last year of the pilot. Maryland was able to jump on in the last year. We were the only public school system that agreed to be part of the pilot. As a result, we offer free breakfast and lunch to every student in 5 schools currently at Bester, Winter Street, Salem Avenue, Antietam Academy, and the Family Center. In exchange for those free meals, we choose to not collect money from students. We accept a reimbursement percentage from the federal government based on a metric of free and reduced data that is in depth that I could go in detail on if you wish. As a result, our families don't have to submit a traditional meal benefit application to certify themselves for free or reduced price meals. There is separate paperwork that has to be filed to declare their eligibility so that we can claim them for state compensatory education funding. That is a separate application that is not the traditional meal benefit application. The focus of this program was to offer free meals to kids in high poverty locations and to reduce the overhead burden on school systems in terms of not having to collect that application. Unfortunately, due to the structure we have of funding in the state of Maryland, we have to submit the alternate application for those families and have to collect and analyze that data, which we did for this current school year. By and large, our students are gaining the benefit, our families are gaining the benefit of free meals in all of those sites, and I would say that my department is looking at expanding the number of sites that are available in that program for the coming school year.
Is there a threshold by which a particular school qualifies for this?
We can cluster the schools in any way we want. Essentially, the floor is 40%. So if 40% of the cluster of schools have students that are directly certified for free meals, they're eligible for free meals without a meal benefit application, then they're eligible for this program. And then there's a multiplier that determines our reimbursement level.
Great, I appreciate that. I just think it's a great program.
Agreed.
On the other end of the spectrum, if you could talk a little bit on the Commission on Aging, and I believe how many meals go out daily, a couple hundred?
Yeah, so we've been the contractor of record for the Commission on Aging for their senior citizen centers as well as the Meals on Wheels program for many years. The Meals on Wheels has sort of come in and out, but of recent, for the last about 5 years, we've been the supplier for that program. The lion's share of those meals come out of this facility. It's about 250 a day that come out of this facility, and then we have about another 30 that are produced and distributed out of Clear Spring up to Hancock and then in the Smithsburg region. That's a separate contract we run annually in conjunction with the Commission on Aging. We produce the meals, of course, invoice them for our costs related to that program, and they reimburse the department.
Great. And one final, the meal machine.
Yes.
The food truck. That's been a great success. Could you talk a little bit about that and how we're hoping to maybe expand that for summer
I can,
food?
and this is a program that's near and dear to our hearts, and Mike Embley in the office really gets the credit for getting this thing up and off the ground. But we saw this program in some of our trade magazines and said, we can really do this. So the meal machine is a mobile meals truck that we will send out to community areas during the course of the summer. We can also use it during the school year for after-school enrichment programs, so community sites. So we could send this out to, let's say, Boys and Girls Club and distribute meals at the Boys and Girls Club after school. But the meal machine will have 4 sites this summer. It operated 2 last summer where we will drive in and set up. And so this is our first official truck. We received a grant with the the Community Action Council in the City of Hagerstown to buy and outfit and market the Summer Meals Program. So this is the first truck that we're getting officially off the ground. And so in short, the Summer Meals Program provides free meals to students in high poverty areas. So this particular truck this summer will be going to and doing stops at Otterbein Church downtown, right in the parking lot, and I believe this truck is also going out to Cortland Manor and delivering meals into that neighborhood as well. It's about a 30 to 45-minute stop. We open up the truck, offer free meals to the students that are there. The meals have to be consumed on site, and it's fully reimbursed by the USDA through MSDE. Our open sites where we always used to run this in school settings would be lucky to serve 10 or 15 students. Excuse the phrase, would be grabbing kids off the playground to see if they were hungry for lunch. I mean, you could see them out there, and the staff would go out, "Are you hungry? Do you need something to eat? Come on in and get a meal." The meal truck goes into the neighborhoods, and easily we can serve 75 or 80 kids in one stop in 30 minutes, and they come to us. And so we're doing a great service in the community with this
And they
truck.
don't have to pre-qualify, they just walk in?
Because the area,
Wanted to be sure.
because the area serves, or let's say is in a district zone that attends a school that has a high poverty rate, we can serve in that neighborhood at no cost to the students.
Great, I appreciate it. And just finally, for those who might not understand the enterprise fund concept, you're self-sustaining and you pay for your own way.
That's correct.
It's sort of a very simplistic way of thinking. of
Absolutely.
it.
All the expenses are borne by the enterprise fund. So all the revenue is retained within the fund. We pay all of our expenses, labor from administration down through dishwashers. I mean, everything is paid, all of our expenses, the cost to procure the food, the benefits, the chemical and cleaning supplies, uniforms is all paid for by the department. So it is fully sustaining.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? I had one on the paid lunch equity. If I recall, the federal government requires that you charge a certain minimum amount for your meals?
Correct. So the premise is that out of the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, Congress and USDA would like school systems to charge for their paid meal the same value as the free meal subsidy. So for school systems like us that have been sort of lagging that indicator, we are required to increase meal prices annually by the same rate that the federal reimbursement increases for free meals, plus an additional 2%. So really for the next foreseeable future, we'll be looking at meal price increases as a requirement of that law.
And so to put it another way, the 10% increase in the price of the meals is really driven by a requirement. It's not driven by, if we didn't do it, we would lose federal revenue, let's put it that way. Is that right?
Correct. If we didn't raise meal prices, if our operations didn't require it, and we did not raise meal prices, we would be in violation of federal statute. That's correct.
Great, and I guess that's it for me. Other questions? If not, the question's on Mrs. Brightman's motion to approve the Food and Nutrition Services FY15 operating budget. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to personnel action.
Dr. Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board, as discussed in closed session earlier, there are several personnel actions for your consideration today.
Is there a motion to approve personnel actions recommended by staff?
Mr. President, I move for staff recommendation on personnel.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the personnel actions? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. Thank you. That brings us, I'm sorry, student member abstains. You know, in my head I said abstains, but it didn't come out of my mouth that way, so thank you. Next is reports to the board, legislative briefing.
Thank you very much. It's again a pleasure to be here now to give you a wrap-up of the legislative session of this year, and perhaps more importantly, a little bit of a look ahead as to what we can expect next year, when there will be a number of issues coming back in our face, and there will also be a great percentage of new legislators who are not probably familiar, in most cases, with education issues and education funding. So it will be an interesting year to come. But as I noted in my written report, it's important that we always have vigilance right to the last moment of the legislative session, because always something happens in those last few hours, and if you're not there to put in your nickel's worth and to try and make sure that nothing bad happens, it's probably going to happen. So we were able to stop a bad bill from going through. We were able to have it amended in such a way that it would not have been objectionable to local boards. And then fortunately, the bill itself, the cloud bill, failed. I mean, it did not ever go back to the floor. So we were happy about that. That all happened late in the afternoon on the last Monday of sine die. But as I've noted, it was overall a good session for education. The only really unpleasant bill I've described to you at each meeting, and that was the change in the prevailing wage. And that is a very unfortunate change, because it means that the dollars that the local government and the IAC provide for education, for construction, are just not going to go as far, because you will be, in virtually all cases now, required to use the prevailing wage, where here in this county, you've been able to, in many cases, accept a bid that was considerably lower, that did not use the prevailing wage, because there was less than 50% state funding in that project. So that bill happened. It's not going to unhappen. There were people who wanted it to go down to zero, and even have it be on projects less than $500,000. So you have to look at the optimistic side. We lost something, but we didn't lose everything. The disparity grant, of course, was funded. The net taxable income increase was funded. And so there really weren't a lot of surprises along the way. I'll talk about mandates in a minute. Usually, that's one of the big areas that MABE takes much of its energy in killing off legislation recommending new mandates. In the whole area of education reform, everything to do with the PARCC tests and the core curriculum and the teacher evaluation, really there were probably almost 30 bills that went in suggesting one thing and another, some of them very, very extreme. And I would say, in summarizing, that sanity prevailed. There was a requirement that the state board ask for a waiver of certain things from the feds. There is to be a committee set up almost immediately by May 15th that is to look at the issues of the park testing and so forth and report before December of this year, before the end of December, so that the new legislators coming in, the new legislature coming in, will have a pretty good analysis of what's going on and how people are reacting to it. So this area, which could have been really chaotic, the legislators all were involved. Everybody had constituent concerns, but they seemed to understand that there was a movement in an important direction in Common Core curriculum, and that the world probably wasn't going to come to the end to let that happen. But that there did need to be some adjustments in terms of teacher evaluation and so forth. So that was kind of reassuring. I felt that they kind of looked at things and were serious about them, but did not take extreme positions in their legislation. And you had a question?
No.
Oh, okay. I've noted before the Pre-K Act that went through is a framework more than anything else. There's only $4.3 million in that for pre-K for both public and non-public schools for this coming year. So that's really not going to show up very much except as some experiments. But there clearly is the energy to make pre-K statewide and serving everyone. So I think that we'll see more and more money into that, and also probably a lot of issues coming up. The Fairness Negotiations Labor Relations Board was made permanent. There'd been a sunset on that bill, but we did get a requirement that they give a report about their use of the administrative procedures and the Open Meetings Act, because apparently there's been some pretty flagrant violations of that reportedly. And this whole thing on the criminal law, there had been a loophole about who was subject to the fourth-degree sexual offense charges, and your permanent full-time employees were covered, but your part-time employees and people like the coaches were not covered, and now are included in that bill. So those were some of the bills that were comfortably passed and that seemed to make sense to most people. I had given you a list in March of the mandates that were on the table, and there were 12 of them, I believe. Of that, 9 were killed, and that was what we would usually like, because most of the mandates come from some very special interest or are very extreme. The 3 that passed, 2 of those had not been acceptable to us in their original form, but through MABE's effort were able to be amended so that they were acceptable. The one on public records, so that it didn't intrude completely on all forms of records that you would have to provide in the form in which you'd have to provide them. The other one that was amended to become acceptable and was the one that requires defibrillators in every school, and made it a graduation requirement that you had to provide training in both that and CPR. The fact is, your physical education requirements already say that you will provide such training, and now that's going to be the norm, instead of saying that there is a graduation requirement in this field. And then the third one that passed was this one about middle school having defibrillators. And again, that's not all bad. That's not as expensive as most mandates that they were suggesting. So the mandate issue really kind of was pretty successfully dealt with this year. Also, we always look at task forces that are proposed, or studies. And I had listed, I believe, 7 of those that were on the table. And of those, 4 passed, although one of them was changed not to be a task force, and I'll go over those just quickly. The one to study how to improve student achievement in middle school, I'll speak of in a minute because I think it's going to be a very big issue. The one on study safe and healthy school hours, that one I think we've seen coming. It's about what time school should start and whether teenagers ought to be getting up and coming in at 7 or 7:30 or whatever time you have to leave your house in the morning. And the one on the funding formula for corollary athletic programs was changed and is no longer task force. It's just language that says that you need to be looking at how you're doing in your corollary athletic programs. And the one on sports injuries in high school female athletes, it was the daughter of the speaker who, and her colleagues from Annapolis High School who testified in favor of this task force, and it's something, I guess, that hasn't been studied a great deal, and so that task force is occurring. But looking ahead to next year, the task force that I just mentioned to study middle school sounds reasonable, doesn't it? But last year we had the big surprise of the college readiness bill kind of being dumped in and pushed and passed. And that concept had come out of the Southern Regional Education Board. And it is they and the Gates Foundation who are apparently pushing these now the looking in depth at middle schools. So this is kind of a continuation, a pre-college readiness study. So I had the feeling that that's going to be a very big study and that it is probably going to come up with some quite major proposals. We, again, dealt with special education, the IEP, and burden of proof. We held our ground this year, and the bill did not go through, but there is a task force that's been working for over a year now and about to report that is looking at all of the issues relative to that, and there are a great many advocates on that task force. So we expect that their recommendations will be pretty extensive and pretty costly, and will probably be translated into proposed legislation that will come in at the beginning of next year. So I think that's going to take a lot of focus and attention. The task force on the opening day for schools is apparently getting close to reporting, and the rumors are that they're going to say that no school should open, that all schools should open after Labor Day. And of course, this flies in the face of all the school systems in the state of Maryland, and it also flies in the face of your local authority in making that sort of a decision. What kind of legislation will grow out of this, whether that recommendation will be taken seriously? I do understand, the Worcester County schools, where Ocean City is, have decided now that they next year are going to start after Labor Day. But they are, of course, the most affected because they are the Ocean City kids, the kids that can work in Ocean City even up until the 1st of September. But they apparently are not going to say it until after Labor Day, which can be as late as like the 8th, I guess, of September. And there are also the task force on school opening opening times will also fly in the face. It could potentially fly in the face of your local authority to make the decisions about what is best for your system. The school construction program, your members, Dr. Hardings and Mrs. Brightman, spent a good bit of time this year as we tried to make sure that any look at school construction and alternate financing will be reasonable and rational and will reflect the concerns, interests of school systems of this size, and not just the big school systems or the fastest growing school systems. And the governor's office is apparently very soon going to issue an executive order in terms of a real thorough look at alternate financing and other forms of school construction. Because the $275 million that's in the budget, and when you start talking about what one elementary school costs here, and I believe Esther was about $20 million, and you start thinking of 24 jurisdictions, and you start thinking about high schools costing maybe 3 or 4 times that much, $250 million really doesn't go very far. And so using alternate financing, public-private partnerships, lease arrangements, all kinds of creative financing that still can be responsible is what hopefully will come out of this task force. So we're watching carefully to see what the mandate of that task force is, and we have asked that and whether it's a task force or just an internal study, but to make sure that that Washington County, who used the first alternate financing in the state, that your concerns and your input are very much part of the rationale that is looked at in that study. A couple years ago, the big thing was the transfer of a portion of teacher retirement costs to the counties, and then after a certain number of years, the county has to include that in your MOE and at an increased amount for a certain number of years, and then it freezes the amount that the local government has to put in, and any increase thereafter, you have to absorb, you have to pick up. And so that's something that we need to be watching very closely, that nobody is suggesting anything that could increase that burden to school systems, and to be thinking about the implications of that transfer. The state did appropriate $400,000 this year with the expectation of $400,000 next year to do the preliminary studies that will be used as they're thinking about Thornton 2, the whole adequacy study and equity of state education funding. And probably next year there will be legislation in to establish some kind of a Thornton 2 commission. And again, we want to make sure that a system such as the size and wealth and so forth of this kind of community is reflected in that commission, and that the counties, the mid-sized counties is what I would call this, are not overlooked, because that's very important. We are not included in the GCEI, which is one of the funding pieces of the current Thornton, and we don't get the poverty funds, and so we're kind of left out in certain of the funding formulas in the current Thornton, and we hope that that won't be quite the same in the next iteration. We need to be watching the amount of funding that goes into non-public schools. That has increased substantially over the last 2 years. There's $3.5 million for the textbook program, and now $6 million for aging schools that are non-public schools. That's up from 1 or 2 million last year, up to 6. So that's a substantial increase and a trend that we really need to be watching. And then we expect there'll be more proposals on behavioral health,
Art,
mental health.
could I interrupt just a minute? On the funding for non-public schools, just of interest possibly to this community and this board is that there's no accountability system set up to track those dollars. So once, and this was discussed at the legislative meeting, whether it's the textbook or the CIP, once those dollars leave the state and go into that non-public use, there's no accountability for it. And that, I think it's public taxpayer dollars, and it should be held to the same standards as what we're held to. So I just throw that out, editorial comment.
Yes, the construction one I was reading is very strange, that if you're certain, there are 4 factors, as I recall, of age and who you're serving and so forth, but you can get smaller and smaller grants. I think the biggest was 50,000. I'm not sure, maybe it's 100. But even a school that doesn't have any of those 4 qualifications, but is at least 16 years old, can apply, I believe, for a $5,000 grant, which of course isn't a lot, but for some non-public schools, getting $5,000 from the state is a big boost to a budget. So it's a very odd kind of proposal that we really do need to be paying close attention to, and because the current governor has included it the last 2 years, and this textbook one now is maybe 5, 7 years old. And it does reflect a trend. The tax credit program for non-public education has not passed, and we've fought that every year because we think that's a very bad precedent, because it would allow considerably large grants under a tax credit program, and again would be a very powerful trend. So again, on the behavioral health, which is the new phrase for mental health, there was legislation looked at for giving a lot of responsibility to schools to provide behavioral health, which is way beyond, as I understand, what your requirement and responsibilities are now, and would be extraordinarily expensive. But of course, everybody is concerned about mental health, and so the issue isn't going to go away. How it's going to be dealt with and where the money will come from, and trying to make certain that if the schools are given more responsibility, they are given the resources to handle that responsibility. That's what we'll be watching for. And this year, Maryland Association of Counties had a bill in to have the state board give a list of all the non-recurring expenses that they would automatically kind of accept. It was a very kind of strange bill, and fortunately did not move ahead. We believe that there does need to be attention to how the whole non-recurring costs are being used in terms of school systems and counties giving school systems more than MOE. But we didn't think that having a list of them all adjudicated by the state board ahead of time was really the right way to go about it. So those are the things that we already see on the table for next year. So we know it's going to be a big and busy and potentially contentious year. I've had a fine time working with your people, and I am one of your people is the way I feel about it. But it's really been a nice opportunity for me again. Donna Brightman has done a fine job as the chairman of the May Legislative Committee. And then we also established the Quick Response Team with Justin Harding, Dr. Harding, excuse me, and Mrs. Brightman, and the superintendent, and Tony and myself. And that has worked very well. We had many more situations where we provided testimony, either written. I testified on many more bills than I had in previous years because the quick response team wanted me to, and so that was fine. And so it has worked very well, and I think that people know that Washington County is around. The legislators from this county are always have their doors open. They and their staff people are welcoming, and they are available to us, and it's a pleasure to work with all of them. And Jamie Brown and Tony Trotta are immensely helpful and right on top of things, and I talk to them at least daily during the session. So I thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any discussion?
I'd like to make a comment to Ardith and certainly to Mr. Trotta and Jamie Brown. I thought it was a very productive year, and Ardith, you are a huge asset to this team and to this county, and your networking and your years of being downstate in Annapolis and all the people you know and have continued relationships with. We have an open door policy through you, and you get those doors opened and lined up some great FaceTime with some very influential legislators and staff members. So it was, our day in Annapolis this year I thought was very successful, and you put it all together, so I appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Any other discussion? I too will thank you, Ardith. I'm glad you mentioned Jamie Brown. I called here yesterday and got Jamie was on the answered the phone, and I said, Jamie, I feel like I never hear from you anymore because the legislative session's over. I used to hear from her once a day on some bill.
Updates on bills.
So I know Tony and your team spent a huge amount of time, and Ardith and Donna's being humble about her role in all this, but she really was the driver for setting up this process this year that got us as a board working so well with you. So I just want to thank her for setting the bar high for how we can function when it comes to dealing with legislation. We're going to work in the policy committee about finding a way to institutionalize the process that we've used this year so that it will outlive this year and outlive the people who are on the board right now, because we really think it can be a model for how we should operate. So I just publicly want to thank Donna for driving that train and having the initiative to get us to function in this way. I think it served us all well, and as well as all of her other work with the legislative committee and other things she's done. So
I think we should introduce legislation next year to shorten the session from 90 days to 30.
I vote yes.
Okay. Sorry.
5.
5 days, okay.
5 should be enough.
I'll take that amendment, Mr. Ridenhour.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next item on the reports to the board is the 2014 through 2023 enrollment forecast. Mr. Criswell? Ms. Newman, it's nice to see you again. Welcome back.
I'll be back at least once a year. I just love coming down here. You have a stunning view of your boardroom today. than any
We
board
do.
I've ever seen. It's just gorgeous.
We do, thank you.
Makes up for the last 50 years.
Dr. Wilcox, members of the Board of Education, I'm here today with Deanna Newman from Public Pathways Incorporated to present to you the 2014 through 2023 enrollment projections. Every year, about April or sometimes late March, we receive the official enrollment projections from the Maryland Department of Planning. Ms. Newman and I review the numbers. We send out our own projections. As long as they're within a certain percentage of the state's forecast, the state will generally approve it, and we're here today to present those projections to you. And at that, I'll hand over to Ms. Newman.
Okay. Let me make sure that I know how to, oh, I do actually, oh, it doesn't. I've been doing your projections now since 2004, and every year the enrollment has increased. I assume, and I'm actually going to tell you that about the same for the next 6 years at least, that the enrollment is going to increase, but pretty slowly, I think. Typically, when I do the enrollment projections, just as a reminder, I use trend information. I use the standard cohort survivorship trend methodology that is used pretty much by demographers all over the country, which looks at grade by grade information on a pretty minute level. I use the birth data. The birth data I get comes from the State of Maryland Planning Department. They get that information. They give it to me pretty much as a county. I understand, Chad and I were talking a little earlier, that we could get that information by zip code. I'm not sure whether that's going to be useful. People certainly move in that 5-year period of time, but it might be very helpful for us to be able to trace where that kindergarten might be based on where births occurred in the zip code 5 years prior to that. We always track housing. We track housing using the information that's given to us by the city or cities, as well as by the county. It's always a little bit problematic going beyond the first 3 years. And so when you look at the enrollment for the first 3 years, I feel fairly confident that we have enough information about housing. After that, it's pretty much up in the air. I look at program changes, boundary changes, and economic conditions, and some of the things that I don't do is I don't, for example, project any change in maybe your early childhood program or your special programs. A lot of that is given to me as program. This year, one of the things that we looked at is where your magnets were, what the implications were on those schools that had magnet programs and how that was impacting their enrollment, as well as the special schools. I do look at population projections. However, we actually are much better at doing projections in schools because we get to count our kids every year. Whereas the population projections tend not to have the same kind of cutting-edge information. So I think ours are actually better than theirs. And of course, as Chad pointed out, we do look at the Maryland Department of Planning forecast to make sure that we are within their percentage. When I first got here, we were not, and we went and paid a visit to the state, and they, in turn, the next year, actually brought their projections up to where we thought they should be. So sometimes it's good to say, well, we just disagree, and actually point that out. But we haven't had that problem for a while. Here's a typical survivorship. Chart. Here we would look at the survivorship, say from first to second grade, and pick up basic trends and use that trend to project forward. It looks a little chaotic, and so it's probably better across larger enrollment and over longer periods of time than it is on a grade-by-grade basis, but it serves us fairly well. This past year, the elementary enrollment was fairly close. It was a little bit under what we had projected. Almost all of that was in the kindergarten. I look at two ways in which we grow. We grow based on the 5th grade going out and the kindergarten coming in, and we grow between the grades based usually on in-migration. In this particular case, we did have in-migration coming into the elementary schools, about 37 students, but we lost students in terms of what I call the rollover, 688 students leaving the 5th grade and only 1,678 coming in. And so that dampens our growth. And that's going to be pretty much the story over the next 5 years. What's going to happen is, over the next 5 years, as the births, going back to 2008, 2009, 2010, the number of births in Washington County declined. This is actually a national phenomenon. At one point, we thought that this phenomena was going to be pretty much contained to the recession period. People don't have children during recessions. And we were kind of hoping that maybe a couple of years. What you'll see there from 2013 to 2018, which would be 2007 to 2013, really in terms of births, is that it's not going back up. And despite the fact that the economy is improving. One of the things actually that I think is affecting this is that this particular generation, the Generation Y, or the millennials, that some people call them, is that age group between 1982 and 2000. They are currently 14 to 32, and there's some debate about that, edges of that, but that's generally kind of the accepted page. You're a millennial, right? Right? And that particular age group is marrying very late, on average marrying 27 to 29, and therefore having their children later. And it's causing a little bit of a decline in terms of our fertility rates. Our fertility rates right now are as low as they've ever been in that particular age group of 15 to 44. And it seems to be sustaining itself. And what that does is that impacts our kindergartens. And what we're going to see is that as our kindergartens decline, last year probably was our largest kindergarten for the foreseeable future. As our kindergartens decline and larger fifth grades leave, no matter how much growth we have, that is dampening what's going to happen in our elementary schools. And it's like a wave. Like any other an increase or decrease, it's like a wave. It will roll through our elementaries, roll through our middles, and then roll through our high schools and cause a cyclical decline in what's going on in our enrollments. In the middle school this year, we grew. In fact, we grew more in the middle schools than we had initially anticipated, making up pretty much for what we didn't grow in the elementaries. Growing by about 85 students in the middle schools. We had anticipated that. We knew that the outgoing 8th grade was smaller than the incoming 6th grade. What we hadn't anticipated is that we also grew between the grades, again, about 34 students from in-migration into the middle schools. We'll talk a little bit about the housing in a minute, because in many ways the housing almost didn't prepare us for that kind of growth in the schools. At the high school level, we pretty much are looking at that 9th grade. Across the grades, I usually assume that every year that we're going to lose about 100 students across all the grades. We lost a few more than that. This year's high school high school enrollment was barely broke even, and we had anticipated a little bit better than that in terms of the high school. Here's a little bit look at the housing. This year's housing permits, and I get my permits from the State of Maryland Department of Planning, which I get on a quarterly basis. This year's permits were a little higher, probably higher than they've been since 2007. That's still not robust. It was about 350 permits compared to 1,400 permits back in 2005. But there's clearly signs and probably anecdotal signs that you probably could bring up about housing actually kind of kicking off and us seeing a little bit more activity there. I'm going to assume as part of the projections, at least for the next 3 years, and maybe longer than that our housing permits, our housing activity is not going to be more than about 200 to 300 permits a year, and use that as a basis for providing a bottom line in terms of enrollment, growth from in-migration. As I pointed out, I think the kindergarten enrollment is going to dip. It's going to level off a little bit. One of the things that we will look at is what happens between births and kindergarten. How many of those children who were born actually show up 5 years later? When we have housing growth, that number is close to 1 to 1. When we don't have housing growth, it's only about 90% actually show up for kindergarten 5 years later. So I'm expecting that over the next 3 years, that number is going to be just like this past year. It's going to be around 90 to 91%. But maybe by the end of this period, if we have a few years of sustained growth, that number might actually increase a little bit. I know that there's legislation about keeping high school students in mandatory high school for, I don't know how you put that, until they're 18. And I know that you are working on ways in which you would make that happen. I, again, pointed out, I don't do your pre-K enrollment. I pretty much assume that that's a static number until such time as somebody tells me that, no, we're adding 3 classes or 2 classes, or, as in the case of this legislation, adding 30 classes, or whatever that may be. So what you're looking at here does not include any change in the preschool enrollment. This year, I'm more conservative than the state in terms of initially, in terms of the enrollment. By the end of the 6-year period, the state and I are in full agreement as to where we think the enrollment for this district will be. As you can see, it is an increasing enrollment. It isn't, I may sound like doom and gloom here, but I am projecting that over the 6-year period that the school district's enrollment will continue to grow. At the elementary level, probably less than we have been used to in the past, only growth of about 155. I think maybe even some losses or break even over the next couple of years as, again, larger 5th grades move out and smaller kindergartens move in. And that'll vary, obviously, by elementary to elementary in terms of what the impact is. At the middle school level, actually what you'll see there is growth for the next couple of years. And then in 2016-17, that's those smaller grades moving in. It doesn't last very long in the middle school because we've only got 3 grades. But it probably will see some decline there for a couple of years before it catches back on again. And at the high school level, it's up and down a little bit in terms of incoming 9th graders, our expectation as to who stays, any special programs that you may set up according to that. So overall, I'm thinking that, special schools. Again, I don't do special schools, but right now we're showing that the 2 special schools that we are tracking, which is Marshall Street and the Job Development Center, that they're going to remain stable during this period of time. Overall, I think that the enrollment is likely to grow in the 6-year period by about 800. Most of it kind of spread across the board between elementary, middle, and high school in terms of its impact. If we follow that out, though, to 2013, knowing what we know about the potential for housing change, knowing what we expect in terms of the births nationwide and its likely impact here locally, I actually am showing that the projection could grow, and that by 10 years that we might grow by as much as 2,000 students. That information is, Chad has that information on a school-by-school basis, and when we match that up to what the state of Maryland is recommending, it's very consistent also with what they're projecting for Washington County. And that's it. I can open it up for questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Mrs. Brightman?
How deep do you go into housing trends? What exactly do you look at? What kind of trends? In other words, I'm thinking, earlier today we talked about multiple families living in the same home, foreclosures, different types of housing, whether it's senior citizens, Section 8. Do you get into that sort of depth on housing trends?
So what I do is I take the housing that's projected, be it single-family, multifamily. I would not, if it was senior housing, I would just set it aside and not pay any attention to it at all. I'm very dependent on Chad's student yield information, and so as he is looking at whether this particular multifamily, because it has 3 bedrooms, has a higher student yield than, say, these over here, which actually are villas and only have 2 bedrooms, and dependent on what he has to say in terms of what he's found in terms of those yields. I then take that information, that yield information, and I attach it to the housing, and and I depend on the city and the county to give me some concept of how fast that development is building out, how many permits they've had in the past year, how many they're permitted for, do they have to go through any hoops in order to continue onto their next level. And I I spread that out based on some assumptions, multiply it times the student yield information that Chad provides, and then I just check it. And I ask myself, I don't use it to do the projection. I ask myself, is there something about that information that would change my assumptions about the projection? Is there something new? Is it a brand-new development that's going to be starting? They say the King Farm, right? So we haven't had that in our projections thus far for Boonesboro. If it starts, that's new. That changes the trend information that I'm looking at for Boonesboro. So that's how I use that housing information.
And how reactive can you be? I assume it's all based on Chad's information, and how often or frequently do you update or check those trends?
So Chad and I work twice a year, right? We start off in the fall with the September 30th numbers, and usually Chad gets back to me as soon as he has them with the information on the GIS. And then we wait until the spring and we watch we look at the February count and we talk about program changes and that kind of thing. So we must talk about three times a year. We do is this right? Are we going in the right direction?
I might expand on that a little bit. In correspondence more to this morning's discussion.
Exactly.
As far as like when a development comes in, and I think what we were speaking about this morning is or in the early plat stages, if a senior assisted or a senior housing development is going to change over to single family use, anytime I'm made aware of that from the county or any of the municipalities, I always respond and, a copy. I think the board typically receives correspondence or copies of that correspondence. I also make certain that I email that to Deanna, so she's aware of it right away. And then when we do sit down and have our large powwow 3 or 4 times a year, we always sit down and talk about each of those developments. So if there is any changes, we're on it right away for that upcoming enrollment projection year. Since we only do the projections once a year, it's really only an annual update, but it does matriculate out through the future year projections. I'll take just a second just to correct something. I'm sorry. The King Road Farm projection, of course, this year we learned that there were several houses that are now going to be moving forward in the development. We had been including that. It was the TT&K that was out a few years that was in the further projections. We have been showing the King Farm for the next several, but right now we're showing 28 homes there to actually occur this year. So we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit because it's in FY15, but we felt like that was a safe bet. And that's part of the discussions, and that's part of Deanna's experience that she brings, where we sit down and discuss the likelihood of some of these projects maybe occurring or not occurring, and how safe it is to go ahead and put them into the projections. So,
Thank you.
Are there other comments or questions? Mrs. Harshman?
I just had a question about Barbara Ingram on this sheet. It says state-rated capacity 149. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. The actual state-rated capacity of the Barbara Ingram facility itself, not the University of Maryland, is 149 students. Now, as our particular use, I believe they go half day at that facility, and then they attend the other half day at the University of Maryland. So in net, we actually we have a little bit of an advantage there. We can actually serve 300 students through a facility that's rated for 149 students.
I thought it was a little higher than that.
At any one time, you're not going to have.
But I thought it was a little higher than that.
Right.
That's why I was surprised. And also, there are some that by 2014 will be increasing, like maybe 100 students. Is that over capacity?
For which facility, ma'am?
Well, different ones. The one I'm looking at right now is South High, from 1,209 to 1,307, 100 students.
So their enrollment, actually, you're looking at their state-rated capacity. Their enrollment is 1,292 this year,
Yeah, I'm talking about the next year.
And it's increasing to 1307.
Right, which is about 100 over the state rated capacity.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
That is correct, yes, ma'am. South High was currently over capacity this year and projecting it to remain over capacity next year. We've currently been, we have a large number of portable classrooms at that facility that we're using to help mitigate some of that enrollment stress that they're seeing.
And is that the only recourse we have? I mean, is there a chance of getting more classrooms added to the school?
I think it's something we could continue to look at. I know we're going to be having the Educational Facility Master Plan discussion here, I think in 2 weeks, I believe. And I know as part of that discussion, there's, I think at the last year's Educational Facility Master Plan, we included concepts for high school capacity. I believe there's been some discussions on several programs to help mitigate some of the enrollment stress that we're seeing at multiple high schools, not just South High, but to open up a broad range of opportunities. So I think we'll be discussing some of those options and considerations a little more in detail probably in 2 weeks. But for what Mrs. Newman prepared, she's just preparing the actual projections that she's seeing through the enrollment that's going to roll through.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I think one of the other things that'll affect that is the board put, or approved in its budget, $500,000 for the development of the infrastructure for the Public Safety Academy, which would be at 701 Frederick Street. That would pull a number of students out of South High to attend that facility, so that would have some effect on the enrollment at South High ultimately if that project comes to fruition.
Absolutely.
Are there other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much. That brings us to board member committee reports. Mr. Grunendijk, student government?
Student government met, I want to say it was the 30th of April, last Tuesday, and we would actually like to invite all of the board members to our end of the year banquet on May 28th at 6:30 p.m. at Bulls and Bears in downtown Hagerstown. We'll be giving out some awards recognizing our new and past and leaving officers, and there'll be good food, I'm sure. So,
What time again?
6:30 p.m. May 28th.
We'll add that to the board planner, Ms. Chekovic.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
We had a little talk about it before the meeting.
Okay, great. Mrs. Harshman, I understand Mrs. Fisher's going to give the curriculum update?
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate that we will be having the next meeting of curriculum instruction on, at 11:15 on, now I don't have the date. It would be the fourth Tuesday, so, but Mrs. Fisher's.
27th.
27th, thank you. Mrs. Fisher's going to fill in because I was absent due to a family emergency.
Mrs. Fisher?
The Curriculum Committee did meet on April 22nd. We had 2 reports that day. The first was on college and career readiness program K through 12, presented by Mr. George Phillips and Mr. Steve Burnett. Basically, they explained how students work in whole class settings, groups, and as individuals, exploring their own abilities and interests, and then working towards putting together eventually high school classes that help prepare them for whatever goals they have eventually set for themselves. The second report was on the next generation of science standards. This will begin next year with primary grades and is to be fully implemented by 2017, 2018. Basically, these standards will have students going deeper into science explorations rather than increasing the number of topics or the breadth of their study. So they'll be learning fewer concepts, but in more detail. And as already explained, the next meeting is the 27th of May.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Mrs. Williams, Finance?
Yes, the Finance Committee met on Wednesday, April 23rd. Committee members reviewed and discussed with staff the March financial report, the carryover and current year grant reports, and the status of the items remaining on the legislative audit's corrective plan. There are 2 items still remaining on the corrective plan that need to be addressed, and those are dependent on the purchase of and the implementation of back-office software. The expectation is that those 2 items will be completed on or before, not on or before, in December or before of 2015. Also discussed was the status of the RFP for back-office software and the RFP for the 403B and the 457B benefits. The next meeting of the Finance Committee is scheduled for Tuesday, May 27th at 3:30 in the Finance Conference Room.
Mrs. Fisher, Policy Review and Development?
Policy Committee met April 22nd. We made some minor changes to the 2 policies that we discussed earlier today and passed the employee use of social media and the student discipline. We also discussed Policy BHB, Board Member Development Opportunities. I personally went back and reworked that one, and we'll be discussing that along with some other topics tomorrow for our first of the 2 May meetings. Tomorrow's meeting is from 12 to 1:15 in the boardroom. We will also meet on May 27th at 1:45.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Mr. Bailey, Facilities?
Yes, Facilities Committee met on April 22nd. We started with an update of West City, reported that there had been some discussion between homeowners and the city and the board in reference to some stormwater issues and some road issues, but everything seemed to be ironed out and working well now, with the possibility that the school could go out to bid sometime in the July-August framework. One of our members suggested that the Agenda Planning Committee start to think about the naming of that particular school and get involved with the process in the near future. And then we had a tour of the building, which was a wow experience. Very impressed with the learning environment, the colors, the facilities themselves. Just had very, very good feedback from everyone, and would recommend to those that like history to visit that school when the opportunity presents itself, to see the original entranceway from the old South Potomac junior high school,
Junior high.
which is now located as the entrance to the media center at the new Bester Elementary School. Very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. And to follow up on your comment, the committee's comment about naming the new school west of Hagerstown.
Right.
We had discussed that once the bids are awarded, we would immediately follow on with going through the process set out in the policy for naming a school. So thanks for suggesting that.
That's really not far off.
And we're going to, that's right. So we'd like to have it named well before the school's built so that we can stop calling it West City. Mr. Rideout, HR?
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. The HR committee met on the 22nd also. We took a look at HR policies and we're discussing which ones we want to move forward with. Our HR staff are beginning to take a look at an employee bullying and hostile workplace policy. And we're also looking to condense some of the HR policies into several broad categories to make easy access, at Mrs. Brightman's suggestion. We will be meeting again the 28th, I guess it is, isn't that correct? I think 27th in the HR conference, excuse me, okay, board conference.
Board conference room.
Okay. Thank you. And by the way, I have to concur with my colleague to the left. Bester's beautiful. You know, we have been so fortunate, and I think our community has been so fortunate that we have a staff and superintendents who have taken a look at these facilities that we have scientifically, intelligently, knowing when and where and how they should be improved or replaced. Our students are, going to state-of-the-art quality facilities, and I think it promotes a learning environment that can do nothing but benefit us in the long run. So my congratulations to everybody that's involved in that process. We're lucky.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Anything from MABE committees, legislative?
I think we've heard
Board of
enough
Directors.
legislative today,
Okay,
so I'm
anything
going
from
to
conference
pass.
planning or
Thank
any
you.
other MABE committees? Okay, we'll move on to future agenda items. Two items I'll just bring to the board's attention. At the next meeting, we'll bring forth a recommendation for the ad hoc committee to look at the board member orientation. That's for new board members once they're elected and either before or after sworn in. So we'll be developing a charge and a committee slate to bring for the board's consideration. Mrs. Brightman and I will. And we have a work session scheduled for June 3rd with to hear from the Facilities Enrollment Advisory Committee. As you know, they're working on recommendations, and we also had talked about hearing reports from our advisory committees throughout the year. I think a work session certainly qualifies for a meeting with them. So that'll be on June the 3rd. That brings us to board member comments. Mr. Grunendijk,
Nothing.
Mrs. Harshman.
Just information on the museum, which is holding the secondary school art exhibit. So if you have time, stop over and see the works. They are spectacular.
Mrs. Williams.
Yes, thank you to the board for the opportunity that I had to attend the MABE Boardmanship Academy session that was held on April 25th in Cumberland at the home of Allegheny County's Board of Education. It's truly the home of that Board of Education. It's a mansion that dates back to the 1850s. And it was just a treat to be able to be there and tour it. Dr. Wilcox, Jamie Hayden and I, along with more than 20 others, heard from Steve Bounds, who is MABE's Director of Legal and Policy Services, and we had the chance to discuss in small groups social media and bring your own device policies. I've asked Mrs. Chekovic to copy the handout that was given to participants as a way to share the information, and I think it'll be helpful to us as we work on our social media policy.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mrs. Brightman.
No comments this afternoon.
Mrs. Fisher.
I just have been looking out the windows here and thinking how much more beautiful that vista is than where we recently came from.
We have no vista.
No, you're right.
Mr. Bailey.
Just a brief commercial that people will be able to see this facility on Thursday evening from 4 to 7, and they're all invited cordially.
Mr. Ridenhour.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Superintendent.
Mr. Bailey took my thunder.
All right.
As always.
I do that.
Well done.
Nothing else?
Put the hay in the barn.
I would also share that kind of core to this building's mission and the board's vision, we will also be hosting in early June several candidates forums, but we'll leave that to the Herald Mail to announce their forums. But this building will serve as the location for them.
Great. Thank you. I have a couple of items. First, just to let the community know that we have, I think I have it here, about a 2.5-page list of, there it is, of events and things that we've been invited to as board members to sort of celebrate the end of the school year. And we want everybody to know how much we appreciate members of the community, members of the school system, inviting us to be a part of those celebrations, and we are endeavoring to do our best to be sure that we are represented at all of them. But as you can imagine, there are many events on here, and it may be that we can't get to all of them. Please know that that's not a reflection of our enthusiasm for what you've done, for student achievement, for the work of our teachers, administrators. We're thrilled to have this much excitement about public education, and we're going to do our best to get to as many as we can. And just secondly, to follow up on something I said before, as I was thinking about the legislative committee and our legislative work this year, it's a really great example of something I've heard Mrs. Brightman say many times, which is you can lead from any chair, that when you see something that you think the board maybe could do, to build a consensus, as Mrs. Brightman did, and to sort of work with her colleagues to develop a new process, I think just shows that any member has the ability to really have an impact on what we do and to leave a legacy for what future boards will do. So I just wanted to acknowledge that again, and thank you. That brings us to the end of the agenda. I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.